was her first week in a new school, and she already wished she could go back to her old one. Everything here felt different. The voices, the hallways, even the way people looked at her. She walked quietly through the corridors, clutching her small lunchbox, trying not to draw attention. But somehow, silence always attracted noise. "Hey, new girl, you're in our spot," a tall boy said, pointing to the bench where she'd sat down to eat. She quickly stood up, mumbled an apology, and walked away. Laughter followed her, the kind that sticks to your back and doesn't let go. She found a corner near the stairs and sat there alone. Her name was Lena, a quiet girl with eyes that always seemed to be somewhere else. Her mother had moved them to this town after the divorce, saying it was a new beginning. But for Lena, it felt like the ending of everything familiar. Her mother worked long hours at a bakery, leaving early in the morning and returning late at night. At home, it was often silent, just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock. After lunch that day, Lena wandered through the school building, trying to find a place where she could be invisible. She walked past the auditorium and something made her stop. A soft sound drifted out through the slightly open door, a sound she hadn't heard in a long time. It was music. Someone was playing the piano. She pushed the door a little wider and peeked inside. On the stage stood a black grand piano, its lid open like a pair of wings. The sound that came from it was warm and gentle, flowing like a quiet river. A girl was sitting there, her hands moving gracefully over the keys. A few students sat nearby watching. Lena felt something stir inside her. She had seen pianos before but had never touched one. The music seemed to speak to her in a language she somehow understood. She wanted to go closer to feel those keys under her fingers. But before she could step in, the bell rang and everyone started leaving. After school ended, she found herself walking back to the auditorium. The place was empty now. The stage looked bigger without the people. The piano sat quietly under the dim light, almost as if waiting for someone to notice it. She climbed the steps slowly, her heart beating faster. When she reached the piano, she hesitated. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Then gently she pressed one. A single note echoed softly through the room. It was beautiful. She pressed another, then two at once, experimenting with the sounds. Her face lit up with a small smile. Just then the door opened. She turned around quickly. A group of students entered, the same ones she had seen earlier. "They were from the music club. What are you doing?" One of them said, walking closer. "I was just trying," Lena said softly. The boy smirked. "Trying? You don't just try a piano. Do you even know what a chord is?" Another girl laughed. Maybe she thought it's like playing a toy keyboard. They started laughing louder. Lena's hands froze above the keys. Her throat felt tight. She didn't know what to say. "Come on, don't break it," one of them said sarcastically. "This isn't for beginners." She stood up quickly and stepped back from the piano. Her eyes stung, but she didn't want them to see her cry. She rushed past them, out the door and down the hallway. The laughter followed her like a shadow. That night she couldn't sleep. The sound of those notes she played kept echoing in her mind. The soft, trembling music she had created for just a few seconds. She thought about the laughter too, but somehow the music stayed louder in her heart. She didn't know why, but she wanted to play again. The next day after school, she searched the library for anything about piano playing. There was an old dusty book titled Beginner's Guide to Piano. She took it home and started reading it by the dim light of the kitchen bulb. She didn't have a piano, but she drew a keyboard on a piece of cardboard, marking the white and black keys with a pen. Then she placed it on her table and practiced moving her fingers over it, following the pictures from the book. Her mother came home late, tired from work. "You're still awake?" she asked gently. Lena nodded. "I'm learning piano." Her mother smiled sadly. "We can't afford lessons right now, sweetheart. Maybe later." "It's okay," Lena said. "I can practice like this for now." Her mother looked at the cardboard keyboard and sighed. She wished she could give her daughter more, but didn't say it aloud. She just placed a hand on Lena's shoulder and whispered, "You have your father's patience." Every day after that, Lena practiced quietly in her room. She memorized the keys, their names, and how to place her fingers. It wasn't real music yet, but she imagined it was. Sometimes she hummed the sounds to herself while moving her hands over the cardboard. It was strange, but it made her happy. One afternoon while walking home, she heard someone playing piano again. The sound was coming from a nearby house with its windows open. She stopped outside the gate, listening. The melody was soft but full of feeling. She stood there until the music stopped. Then an old man came to the window and noticed her. "You like piano?" he asked with a kind smile. Lena nodded shyly. "Come in," he said. "You can listen closer if you want." She hesitated but slowly opened the gate and stepped inside. The house smelled of old books and wood polish. In the living room stood a brown upright piano. The old man sat down and played a few notes. "It's not as grand as the one in school," he said, "but it has its own voice." He asked her to sit beside him. "Go on," he said. "Try." Her heart raced. She placed her hands on the keys just like she did on her cardboard version. She pressed a few keys gently. The sound was real this time, alive. The man chuckled softly. "You have a light touch," he said. "That's good. Music listens back when you play softly." She smiled for the first time that day. He introduced himself as Mr. Harlan, a retired music teacher who hadn't taught in years. From that day, Lena started visiting him every evening after school. He showed her simple tunes and how to read basic notes. She listened carefully, eager to learn. When she made mistakes, he didn't scold her. Instead, he said, "Every wrong note is a step toward a right one." Sometimes when she played a short melody perfectly, he would close his eyes and say, "That's it. That's music." At school, she still kept to herself. The same students who had laughed at her didn't even notice her anymore. She didn't mind. Her world had grown bigger than their words. Every time she sat at the piano in Mr. Harlan's home, she felt like she belonged somewhere. As weeks passed, she started improving. Her fingers moved faster and smoother. She began to understand how emotions could live inside sounds. Mr. Harlan told her about composers who turned their pain into beauty, and she listened as if those stories were her own. Sometimes, on her walk home, she would stop by the school auditorium again. The grand piano was still there, locked behind the stage curtains. She wished she could play it one day, properly in front of everyone. Not for applause, but to show that she had found her voice. One afternoon, as she walked by the notice board, she saw a bright poster pinned there. "Annual School Talent Show, sign up this week." She stared at it for a long time. Students were already adding their names for singing, dancing, and comedy acts. Her heart thumped as she imagined her name on that list. But the memory of laughter stopped her hand halfway. That night, she told Mr. Harlan about the poster. He looked at her for a moment, then said gently, "You should do it." She shook her head quickly. "They'll laugh again." "Let them," he said softly. "But this time let them hear something worth remembering." She didn't answer. But when she got home, she couldn't sleep. She imagined herself sitting at that piano, her hands moving across the keys, her heart pouring out through the music. She could almost hear the sound, the same one that had drawn her to the auditorium that first day. The next morning, she walked into school early. The hallway was empty, quiet. She stood in front of the notice board, holding the pen tightly. Then, with a deep breath, she wrote her name on the list. Her handwriting was small and shaky, but it was there. For a moment, she just stared at it, her heart beating hard. As she turned to leave, she heard footsteps behind her. A few students had come in early and were looking at the list. One of them noticed her name and laughed softly. "She's joining? The piano girl?" Lena didn't look back. She just kept walking, her steps slow but steady. For the first time, she didn't feel small. The laughter didn't sting the same way it used to. Because now she had something stronger than fear. She had a dream, and a melody waiting to be heard. The morning after signing her name for the school talent show, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Her heart was filled with both fear and excitement. As she walked into class, she noticed the whispers start again. People were already talking about her name on the list. She could hear small laughs and feel eyes following her as she sat down. Someone behind her said quietly, "She's really going to embarrass herself." She kept her head down and pretended not to hear. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened her notebook. The teacher's voice sounded far away. All she could think about was the piano, the stage, and that crowd waiting for her. At lunch, she sat alone like usual. The noise of the cafeteria was loud, students chatting, laughing, trading food. But to her, it all faded into a low hum. She opened her phone and searched for the song she wanted to play. She didn't want something too hard. She wanted something with feeling, something that could speak for her. After listening to a few melodies, she found one that made her heart ache in a good way. It was simple but beautiful. That evening, she walked to Mr. Harlan's house. The sun was setting and the air was cool. He was waiting by the door, smiling when he saw her. "You signed up, didn't you?" he said with a grin. She nodded shyly. "I did." He clapped his hands once, pleased. "Good, then it's time we make them listen." They sat at the piano and she told him about the song she wanted to play. He listened quietly, nodding to the rhythm. "A wise choice," he said. "It's not about how difficult the song is. It's about how much of yourself you put into it." She began to practice. The first few tries were messy. Her fingers stumbled and she pressed the wrong keys. She bit her lip, frustrated. But the old man didn't scold her. He just said, "Start again. Every mistake teaches you something." So she did, again and again. The room filled with broken notes and small sighs, but she kept going. Sometimes he'd play beside her, showing her how to move her hands softly, how to feel the rhythm instead of forcing it. As the days passed, she got better. Her fingers began to find their way naturally. The song started to sound like real music. One evening, as she finished a piece, she looked up and saw him smiling with his eyes closed. "Now that's music," he said softly. "You made it breathe." She smiled shyly, her heart swelling with quiet pride. But not every day was easy. There were times she wanted to give up. At school, the teasing didn't stop. Some students would joke about how she was training to play for birds or how she'd probably freeze on stage. Their laughter hurt, but she didn't show it anymore. At night, when her mother came home from work, Lena would tell her about her practice sessions. Her mother would listen while cooking dinner, sometimes too tired to respond, but always smiling when Lena talked about her progress. "I wish your father could hear you play," she once said softly. He always loved the sound of the piano. That made Lena's heart ache. She barely remembered her father's face, but she liked to believe he would have been proud of her. One Saturday, she stayed at Mr. Harlan's house longer than usual. They practiced the same song for hours until she could play it without stopping. When they finally finished, he said, "You're ready for more now." He opened a small notebook filled with handwritten notes and sketches. "These are exercises I used to teach my students years ago. Take it. Practice them every morning before school." She accepted the notebook carefully as if it were something precious. That night, she stayed up late practicing on her cardboard keyboard at home. She followed the old man's notes closely, tapping the keys softly and humming the sounds. She imagined the real piano under her fingers, the sound echoing through the room. But the more she practiced, the more nervous she became. The talent show was getting closer. Posters were everywhere now, and people were talking about it daily. The music club had already announced that they would perform a popular song with a full band. Everyone expected them to win again. One day, as she walked into class, one of the club members said loudly, "Hey, piano girl, you ready for the big show? Try not to break any keys this time." The room filled with quiet laughter. She felt her cheeks burn but said nothing. Instead, she sat down quietly and opened her notebook, pretending not to care. But deep inside, the words stuck like small thorns. That evening, she played more passionately than ever. Each note carried her frustration, her sadness, and her determination. The sound filled Mr. Harlan's small house, rising and falling like waves. When she finished, her hands were shaking. He looked at her and nodded slowly. "Good," he said. "That's what music is. It's not about perfection. It's about truth." She didn't quite understand what he meant then, but she could feel it. Every time she played, it was like she was talking without words. A few days later, the school held a rehearsal for all participants. Each student got to test the stage and sound system. When her turn came, she felt her stomach tighten. The same students from the music club were there, watching. As she walked to the piano, she could hear someone whisper, "This should be fun." She sat down and took a deep breath. The piano looked huge under the bright stage lights. Her fingers trembled as she placed them on the keys. She started playing, but halfway through, her nerves took over. She pressed the wrong key, then another. The melody broke apart. A few people laughed quietly in the seats. She froze. Her hands wouldn't move. The sound technician said gently, "You can start over if you want." But she couldn't. She just stood up, mumbled an apology, and hurried off the stage. That evening, she didn't go to Mr. Harlan's house. She went straight home and closed her door. She sat on her bed, staring at the cardboard keyboard on her table. It looked so useless now. The sound of the laughter echoed in her mind again and again. She thought about quitting. It would be easier to stay invisible. Nobody would laugh if she didn't give them a reason. Her mother knocked softly. "You didn't go to your lesson today?" "I'm tired," Lena said quietly. Her mother walked in, sat beside her, and gently took her hand. "You've been working hard," she said. "But remember, every dream feels heavy before it becomes real." Lena didn't answer. She didn't even know if she believed that. The next day, when she finally went back to Mr. Harlan's house, he was waiting for her. He didn't ask why she had missed a day. He just said, "Sit down. Let's play." She hesitated. "I can't, I messed up at school." "So what?" he said calmly. "Do you know how many times I messed up in front of people? Hundreds, maybe thousands. But each time I learned something new." She looked at him surprised. "You did?" He smiled faintly. "Of course. The only people who never fail are the ones who never try." For a moment the room was silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Then she sat down at the piano. He didn't tell her what to play. He just said, "Close your eyes and let your hands find the sound." She took a deep breath and started. At first the notes were shaky, but then something shifted. The music began to flow, soft and steady. It wasn't the song she was supposed to practice, it was something new, something she hadn't played before. But it was real. It was her. When she finished, she opened her eyes. Mr. Harlan was smiling quietly. "Now that," he said, "was your music." She felt tears sting her eyes, but this time they weren't from sadness. From that day on, she practiced differently. It wasn't about showing off anymore or proving anyone wrong. It was about the feeling inside her, the one that came alive when she touched the keys. Every evening she played until the sun went down. Sometimes she'd look up and see Mr. Harlan watching her with proud eyes. Other times she'd close her eyes and imagine playing in the school auditorium again, but this time without fear. The night before the talent show, she stayed up late, sitting by the window, watching the moonlight fall across the floor. Her hands rested on her lap and she whispered softly to herself, "Tomorrow I'll play for me." She didn't care who laughed anymore. She just wanted to let the music speak. The morning of the talent show came faster than she expected. Lena woke up before sunrise, her stomach twisting with nerves. The air outside was cool, and a soft light was beginning to spread across the sky. She sat by her window for a while, just staring out. Her hands felt cold, but she didn't know if it was from the weather or from fear. Her mother had already left for work, but she'd left a note on the kitchen table. It said, "You've already made me proud. Just play from your heart." Lena read it 3 times before folding it and putting it in her pocket. At school, the excitement was everywhere. Students were decorating the auditorium, teachers were setting up chairs, and the music club was rehearsing loudly on stage. Their laughter and confidence filled the room. When Lena entered, a few of them glanced at her. One of them whispered something that made the others laugh quietly. She pretended not to notice. Her name was near the bottom of the performance list. The organizer told her she would go second to last, right before the final act from the music club. She nodded politely, though her heart sank. She knew that meant the audience would already be tired by the time it was her turn. She sat quietly at the back of the hall as other students rehearsed. Some sang, some danced, a few did short comedy skits. Each act got cheers from friends sitting in the audience. Lena watched them, trying to imagine what it would feel like to walk up there and play. After lunch, she went to Mr. Harlan's house one last time before the show. He opened the door with a smile. "I was expecting you," he said. I needed to play once more before tonight," she said softly. He nodded and led her to the piano. She sat down, her fingers trembling a little. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock. Then she began to play. The melody floated gently through the house. It was calm at first, then it grew stronger, carrying a mix of nerves and hope. When she finished, she looked up. Mr. Harlan smiled, his eyes glistening slightly. "You're ready," he said. "What if I mess up again?" She whispered. He chuckled softly. "Then you start again. But this time, don't play to impress them. Play to tell your story." She nodded slowly, letting his words sink in. Before leaving, he gave her a small folded paper. "For after the show," he said. "Don't open it until then." She promised she wouldn't. By evening, the auditorium was packed. Parents, teachers, and students filled every seat. The lights were bright, the stage looked bigger than ever, and the air buzzed with excitement. The sound of laughter and talking echoed through the hall. Lena stood backstage, clutching her hands together. She could hear the music club warming up behind the curtain, tuning their instruments and chatting confidently. The stage manager called out names as each act went up. One by one, they performed to cheers and clapping. Her heart raced as her turn came closer. She could feel sweat on her palms. She closed her eyes and tried to remember Mr. Harlan's words. Don't play to impress them. Play to tell your story. When the announcer finally called her name, the noise in the room dimmed slightly. A few whispers rose from the crowd. Isn't that the girl who messed up during rehearsal? Someone said. She took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The lights hit her face, making it hard to see the audience. Her knees felt weak, but she kept walking until she reached the piano. The black surface reflected her nervous face. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen. Then she sat down slowly, adjusted the bench, and placed her fingers on the keys. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. A few people coughed. Someone whispered again. And then she began to play. The first few notes came out softly, uncertain, almost trembling. But she kept going. With each note, her fear started to fade. The sound grew stronger, steadier. The melody filled the air, wrapping around the audience like a story being told without words. It wasn't a showy song. It didn't have fast runs or loud chords, but it was full of feeling. Gentle sadness, quiet hope, a touch of courage. Every key she pressed seemed to speak something she had never been able to say out loud. The crowd, which had been restless a few moments ago, fell silent. The laughter stopped. Even the whispers disappeared. Her fingers moved with a calm rhythm now, each note flowing into the next. She wasn't thinking about the people watching her anymore. She wasn't thinking about the teasing or the mistakes. It was just her and the piano. For the first time, she wasn't scared of being seen. In the middle of the song, a light breeze from the stage curtains brushed against her face, and she smiled slightly. The music softened, slowed down, then rose again like a voice finding strength. As she reached the final part of the song, she thought of her mother's note in her pocket, of Mr. Harlan sitting at home waiting to hear how it went, and of all the nights she practiced quietly when no one believed she could do it. The last note hung in the air for a long, beautiful second, then silence. Pure silence. For a heartbeat, she thought maybe they hadn't liked it. But then, someone started clapping. Then another. Then the whole room filled with applause. Loud, real applause. She looked up, stunned. The same faces that had laughed at her now looked amazed. Some were even standing. The music club members sat speechless. She saw her teacher smiling proudly near the front row. The lights felt warmer now, softer. She stood up slowly and gave a small bow, her eyes glistening. As she stepped off the stage, a teacher touched her shoulder and whispered, "That was beautiful." Backstage, she felt dizzy with relief. Her hand still trembled, but now it was from joy. She had done it. She had played through the fear, and somehow she had reached them. Later, as the show ended, the music club performed their final song with all their usual energy and confidence. The crowd cheered loudly again, but this time Lena didn't feel small. She knew she had found her place. After the event, people came up to her in the hallway. Some congratulated her. A few even apologized for laughing before. She smiled politely, too overwhelmed to speak much. When she finally got home, her mother was waiting at the door. "I got off early," she said. "How did it go?" Lena smiled for the first time that night. A big, bright smile that said everything. Her mother hugged her tightly. "I knew you could do it," she whispered. Later, when she was alone in her room, Lena remembered the small folded paper Mr. Harlan had given her. She took it out and opened it carefully. Inside was a short note written in his shaky handwriting. It said, "No matter how big the crowd, always listen for the silence that follows your last note. That silence is respect. That silence means they heard you." She read it twice, tears welling in her eyes. She knew exactly what he meant. That silence she had felt after her last note, it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of feeling, full of understanding. The next morning, when she went to school, something was different. People greeted her with smiles. The same ones who used to ignore her now said hello. Even the music club members nodded politely when they passed her in the hallway. But she didn't let it change who she was. She still sat alone at lunch, still practiced quietly in her notebook, and still went to Mr. Harlan's house every evening. Only now she played with more confidence. The music came out stronger, clearer. One afternoon he asked her, "So how did it feel to play in front of everyone?" She thought for a moment. "It felt like I was finally speaking," she said. He nodded. "That's exactly what music is for." Days passed and the excitement from the talent show slowly faded from school. But for Lena, it was just the beginning. Every day after class, she walked to Mr. Harlan's house ready to learn more. He began to teach her about reading sheet music, how to control the weight of each note, and how to use silence as part of a song. He often said, "Anyone can play notes, but only a few can make them mean something." She tried her best to be one of those few. Sometimes, when she played something new, she'd glance at him to see his reaction. He never said much, just smiled quietly. The kind of smile that told her she was doing well. And every time she walked home after their lessons, she'd pass by the school auditorium. Through the window, she could see the same piano sitting there, quiet and still. She would stop for a moment, smile, and whisper softly, "Thank you." Because that was the piano that had started it all. The laughter, the tears, the music, and the silence that changed everything. The night of the talent show finally arrived. The school auditorium looked brighter than ever. Rows of chairs filled the hall, and the air buzzed with laughter, chatter, and the sound of last-minute rehearsals backstage. For most students, this was a night of fun and excitement. But for her, it felt like her heart was racing faster than time itself. She sat quietly near the edge of the stage, clutching a small folded paper in her hands. On it were her notes, tiny reminders scribbled in pencil. Breathe, feel, don't rush. Her fingers trembled slightly, and her stomach turned with nerves. Behind her, students rushed past wearing shiny costumes, carrying guitars and talking loudly about their acts. Some of them looked at her and smiled politely. Others whispered to each other, trying not to be seen. She heard one of them chuckle softly. "I still can't believe she's actually performing." Another voice replied, "Let's hope she doesn't mess up too badly." Their laughter stung for a moment, but she took a slow breath and reminded herself of the promise she made. To play for herself, not for them. She peeked through the curtain and saw her mother sitting in the middle row, looking tired but proud. Her mother waved and smiled when their eyes met, mouthing the words, "You can do it." That one gesture gave her a tiny spark of courage. A few seats away, she noticed Mr. Harlan, her old music teacher and neighbor, sitting quietly with a warm expression on his face. He gave her a small thumbs up. That simple sign meant the world to her. It reminded her of the long evenings at his house, practicing the same melody over and over, until her fingers almost memorized every note. The show began with loud applause as the first act took the stage, a group of dancers moving to an upbeat pop song. The crowd cheered wildly. Next came a group of students from the music club playing guitar and drums, filling the room with rhythm and energy. Everyone clapped and sang along. She sat backstage, feeling smaller and smaller as each act seemed to win louder applause than the last. Every minute that passed made her heart pound harder. She tried to steady her breathing, but her thoughts kept racing. What if she forgot the notes? What if her hands shook too much? What if they laughed again? When the announcer finally called her name, there was a short silence, then a few scattered claps. She walked toward the stage, her legs feeling heavy, her palms cold and sweaty. The bright lights hit her face, almost blinding her for a moment. She could barely see the faces in the crowd anymore, just shadows and shapes. Someone in the back whispered something that made a few students giggle. She swallowed hard, walked to the piano, and sat down slowly. Her heart felt like it was pounding right in her throat. She placed her fingers on the keys, but they were trembling so much that she pulled them back for a second. Then she remembered what Mr. Harlan had told her before the show. Music isn't about being perfect. It's about speaking from your heart. Let it speak for you tonight. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let her hands fall gently back onto the piano. The first note echoed softly through the hall. It was shaky, uncertain, but real. She pressed the next few keys, then another, and slowly the melody began to form. At first, the audience was restless. Someone coughed. A chair squeaked. A few students whispered. But as the notes flowed together, something shifted in the room. The melody grew clearer, smoother, filled with emotion. Her fingers started to move with confidence, no longer thinking, just feeling. She forgot the people watching. She forgot the laughter, the whispers, the fear. In that moment, it was just her and the piano, breathing together, telling a story only they could understand. The soft rhythm filled every corner of the hall, rising and falling like a heartbeat. Her hands moved gracefully, almost floating across the keys. She could feel the music inside her chest, in her fingertips, in every breath she took. The melody carried a mix of everything she had felt: loneliness, hope, courage, and the quiet strength that had kept her going when no one believed in her. Each note was like a memory, of her mother working late, of Mr. Harlan's patient smile, of the nights she practiced on paper keys when she had no piano to play. It was all there, hidden inside the sound. The laughter that once filled the room had disappeared. The same students who had mocked her now sat frozen, their eyes fixed on her hands. Even the teachers leaned forward, listening closely. The hall, which had been filled with noise and chatter moments ago, now held a silence so deep it felt like the world had stopped for her music. She reached the middle of her piece, the part she used to struggle with most. She hesitated for a heartbeat, afraid she might mess it up, but then remembered how many times she had practiced it in Mr. Harlan's small living room. She could almost hear his voice saying, "Trust yourself." So she did. Her fingers danced across the keys, hitting every note perfectly, her heart swelling with relief and pride. The melody climbed higher, brighter, until it reached its peak, then softened into a gentle, peaceful end. When the last note faded into silence, she kept her hands on the keys, still trembling, afraid to look up. The hall was completely still. For a moment she thought she had failed, that maybe no one understood. Then slowly someone began to clap. It was a soft sound at first, then another joined and another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium erupted in applause. People stood up, cheering, whistling, shouting her name. Her heart flooded with emotion as she finally looked up. Her mother was standing, tears running down her cheeks, but smiling proudly. Mr. Harlan clapped slowly, his eyes shining. He mouthed one simple word: "Beautiful." She stood and bowed slightly, her face glowing red, a shy smile spreading across her lips. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. Not for how she looked, not for what she lacked, but for something she had created from her heart. The applause grew louder, and she could barely stop herself from crying. She looked at the same students who used to laugh at her, and many of them now had genuine smiles. One of them even mouthed, "You were amazing." When she walked off the stage, she felt light, almost like she was floating. Her mother rushed backstage, wrapping her arms around her tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "You did it." The warmth of that moment was something she would never forget. A few students came up to her, shyly complimenting her performance. "That was beautiful," one girl said softly. "I didn't know you could play like that." She smiled and simply replied, "I didn't either until now." Mr. Harlan approached her last. His steps were slow, but his eyes were filled with pride. "You see?" he said gently. "They heard you. Not your mistakes, not your fears, just you." She smiled, trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. She just hugged him instead. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking a little. "For everything." He patted her back and smiled. "Keep playing," he said. "Never stop letting your heart speak." That night, when she got home, she sat quietly by the window looking at the moon. The sound of applause still echoed in her ears. She could hardly believe it had really happened. For so long she had felt invisible, laughed at, doubted. But that one night changed everything. Not because people finally respected her, but because she finally believed in herself. She realized that she didn't need to be perfect or to prove anyone wrong. All she needed was the courage to share what was already inside her. Her mother came into the room with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. They sat together in silence for a while. Then her mother said softly, "You know, when you first touched that piano at school, I thought maybe it was just curiosity. But now I see it's a part of you." She smiled, staring into her cup. "It is," she said quietly. "And I think it always will be." As she went to bed that night, her fingers still tingled from playing. She closed her eyes and replayed the melody in her mind, smiling as she drifted off to sleep. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. She had found her voice, and this time, the world had listened. The morning after the talent show felt different. The sun came through her window brighter than usual, and for the first time in a long while, she woke up smiling. The memories from the night before were still fresh in her mind. The lights, the applause, her mother's proud face, and the way her heart had raced as the final note faded into silence. It all felt like a dream she never wanted to end. At school, the halls that once felt heavy and cold now buzzed with a new kind of energy. As she walked in, people turned and smiled. A few clapped softly when she passed by. Someone said, "That was amazing last night." And another added, "You really showed us what music means." She didn't know how to respond except to smile shyly and whisper a quiet, "Thank you." For months, she had walked these same halls with her head down, trying not to be noticed. But today, for the first time, she felt like she belonged. Her teacher stopped her outside the classroom, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I have to say," the teacher began with a warm smile, "you were the highlight of the night. That was real music." The words made her blush, but deep down they filled her heart with pride. All those late nights, all the quiet practice, all the moments she had doubted herself. It had all led to that single performance that changed everything. During lunch, a few students from the music club approached her. They looked nervous, which surprised her. One of them, the same boy who used to tease her for not knowing how to play, spoke first. "Hey," he said awkwardly, "we were thinking, maybe you could join us for our next project. We could really use a pianist like you." She smiled politely. There was no anger in her heart anymore, only peace. "Maybe," she said softly, "but only if we play something that means something." The group laughed lightly, nodding in agreement. It felt like a quiet sign of respect. That afternoon, she visited Mr. Harlan. His little house looked the same. Flowers by the steps, the smell of coffee coming from the kitchen. He opened the door with a wide grin. "The star herself," he said jokingly, and she laughed. Inside, the old piano stood waiting, the same one she had practiced on for so many evenings. She sat down and played the same melody she had performed at the show. It sounded warmer in that room, softer somehow. When she finished, he clapped once and said, "You didn't just play the notes. You played your heart. Remember that feeling. Never lose it." She spent the next few months practicing harder than ever. The school began inviting her to perform at small events. Sometimes she played alone. Other times she helped other students learn. She discovered she loved teaching. Seeing someone's eyes light up when they hit their first clean chord or finished a short melody. It reminded her of her own beginning, and it made her realize how much music had changed her life. As time passed, she grew more confident. She and her mother saved up money to buy a second-hand keyboard so she could practice at home. Every evening, the sound of soft piano notes filled their small apartment. Her mother would sit nearby, listening quietly while doing her work. Sometimes she would hum along, and the room would feel warm and full of love. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the local community center. They were hosting a youth music competition, and one of her teachers had submitted her name without telling her. At first, she hesitated. The thought of performing in front of strangers made her nervous again. But then she remembered that stage, that moment when she silenced the laughter with her music. She took a deep breath and decided to enter. Weeks later, she stood backstage again, this time surrounded by talented young musicians from all over the city. Some had been taking lessons since childhood. Others came from families of artists. She felt out of place at first, but when she touched the piano keys during her rehearsal, the familiar comfort returned. When it was her turn to perform, she closed her eyes and let her fingers move. The music came from somewhere deep inside her, a mix of joy, longing, and gratitude. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then the judges smiled and applauded softly. She didn't win first place, but she didn't care. What mattered was that she had done it. She had stood there and played her truth. One of the judges approached her afterward, an older woman with kind eyes, and said, "You play with feeling. That's something that can't be taught." She handed her a small card and said, "If you ever want to study music seriously, call this number." That one moment opened doors she had never dreamed of. With help from her teachers, she applied for a music scholarship and got accepted into a local arts program. When she told Mr. Harlan the news, he smiled proudly and said, "I always knew you'd go far. You just had to believe it too." She hugged him tightly, whispering, "I couldn't have done it without you." As the years went by, her life changed slowly but beautifully. She performed at small concerts, helped young students learn, and played at community events. Her name started to be known in small circles of musicians. Yet she never forgot where she started, from the shy girl who touched a piano for the first time and was laughed at. That memory, instead of hurting, became her strength. It reminded her how far she had come and how much a single moment of courage could change everything. One winter evening, she got a call from Mr. Harlan's daughter. Her voice was soft and shaky as she said that he had passed away peacefully in his sleep. The news hit her hard. She sat by her piano, unable to play, her hands resting silently on the keys. He had been more than a teacher. He was a friend, a guide, a light during her darkest days. A few days later, she attended the small memorial service. His daughter handed her a letter and a key. "He wanted you to have this," she said gently. When she opened the letter later that night, she found a few short lines written in his familiar handwriting. "Keep playing. Let the world hear you. This piano now belongs to you. Make it sing again." Tears filled her eyes as she read the words. The key was to his old music room. She went there the next day and everything looked the same. The piano, the framed pictures, the smell of old sheet music. She sat down and began to play his favorite song, letting her tears fall freely as her fingers moved across the keys. Each note felt like a goodbye and a thank you at the same time. Years passed. She went on to college, studying music and performing in small halls. She never became a celebrity, but she didn't need to. Her joy came from the moments when people listened and felt something real. After graduation, she returned to her hometown and started teaching at the same school where her journey had begun. The piano in the auditorium was still there, shining under the lights, and every time she walked past it, she smiled. Sometimes she would tell her students about a girl who was once laughed at for touching that piano. She wouldn't mention her name, but the message was always clear. Don't let anyone make you doubt what you love. Her students listened closely, and she could see the same fire in their eyes that she once had. One afternoon, while packing up after class, a young student came up to her. "Miss," the girl said shyly, "I'm scared to play in front of people. What if they laugh?" She smiled warmly, recognizing the same fear she once had. "Then play louder," she said softly. "Play so loud that they stop laughing and start listening." The girl nodded and smiled, clutching her music sheets with new determination. As she watched her leave, she felt a deep sense of peace. She realized that the circle had come full. The same courage that once carried her was now being passed on. That night, she sat by the piano Mr. Harlan had left her, the one that had started it all. The wood was old, the keys slightly worn, but the sound was still beautiful. She played the same melody she had performed at the school talent show all those years ago. The music filled the room softly, wrapping around her like a memory. She closed her eyes, smiling through the gentle sound, and whispered, "Thank you." The laughter that once haunted her had long faded away. What remained was her music, her peace, and the quiet strength she had built through every note. And somewhere in the echo of the piano, it felt like Mr. Harlan was still listening, still smiling, proud of the girl who once silenced the world, not with anger, but with music that came straight from the heart.